Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining, and welcome to the EEG webinar sponsored by our main sponsor, one of our main sponsors, Freeths. Today, the purpose of this meeting is really to delve into more of the business angle around why evidence is important. Today, I'm joined by Frank Sutty from Freeths. I'm joined by Ed Tranham from the assignment report, and also Carrie Viori from FinCap Cavendish. Just a little bit more detail as to why we wanted to talk about this. The evidence, the importance of evidence in education is something that we've all been actually focused on. But I think, and the benefits of that to schools is clear. But I think what we wanted to talk about a little bit more is look at the business side of it. So as business founders or business owners or managers, it's important to understand why to the business evidence is important. And so what we wanted to do is to just unpack that a little bit more and look at the different aspects of where good evidence can play its part in adding value to each and all of our businesses. So I think what we'd like to do is to have some small presentations by each of our panelists here. And so if I may introduce the first one, Frank Sutty from Freeths, who will say a few words now about what it is that Freeths do and how they are helping things in the education sector. To Frank.
Thanks, Anthony, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be part of this event. I'm a director in the commercial team at Freeths, so I'm dealing with a lot of work for EdTech companies when they're setting up contracts, when they're doing development of products and so on. And I'm also part of our data protection team. I work with colleagues in employment, commercial litigation, and I'll be touching on that in a minute, and other parts of the practice as well. Now, the way I wanted to start this little presentation is by looking at it from the other end of the telescope, looking at it from what happens in schools and how EdTech is deployed. So it's important to remember that the EdTech that companies out there are developing is a tool in the toolkit for the teacher. We're not in the days yet of autonomous schools, and we are being warned in law that some of our jobs could be going pretty quickly. You know, you could potentially have AI making decisions instead of judges in court. So we all have to be aware of what's going on, but there's nothing radical happening yet. So EdTech is a tool, and it's a particularly powerful and valuable tool. I would describe it almost as a partner to the teacher. You know, the EdTech is partnering the teacher in the delivery of the education outcomes that the school is striving to achieve. And then when you look at it from the pupil's point of view, again, you could say that it's a partner to the pupil because there's a really intimate relationship between the pupil and the product. You're particularly with AI playing such a huge role now in many of the products that schools are exposing children to. But maybe partner isn't the right word, maybe friendly support for the pupil is what it's about. And that's probably a high level definition of what counts as good EdTech. Now, someone mentioned to me the expression the other day, what is bad EdTech? And I'm not going to try and give you an answer to that. It's not within my competency to do that. But it's an interesting point. You know, if we have this concept of good EdTech, we're bound to have the concept of bad EdTech at the same time. So it does bring to mind, how do schools go about selecting technology that they use in their schools? And that, I would have to say, is a very mixed picture. In some cases, I do ask teachers about this. It's something I'm particularly curious about. The most recent conversation, it was a teacher who had moved from one school to another and persuaded the school that she had moved to adopt a product that she had been using, she felt successfully, in a previous school. It could be through a 5-minute demonstration at BET. You know, there's some very good, slick presentations done at BET, and people might be convinced by that. Ask them about how much they actually research products before the decision is taken to buy them. And I'll be interested in the views of other speakers on this, but I didn't hear much about that, about it being a technical research exercise. Often it's word of mouth, it's recommendations, it's being impressed by the product. And of course, if it's about being impressed by the product, then you're going to be particularly impressed by what is said about the product by the party that's marketing it and by others that are using it already. We did a previous presentation with the EdTech Evidence Group. My colleague Will Richmond-Coggan did that, and there's a blog available on the website that I'd suggest you look at. When I asked Will to take on that session, what I was expecting him, and he's a litigator, I was expecting him to talk about the data protection issues, the compliance issues. But what had absolutely staggered me, and hopefully the audience as well, I suspect, is that he as a litigator has actually been involved in litigation that has involved the quality and the representation of evidence to support the marketing of a product or to support the purchase of a product. It could have been a corporate transaction where the business is being bought. Now, Will is based in the Oxford office, so if ever there was an office that was going to get involved in this kind of thing, I guess it's Oxford. And what he was telling people is that you really have to look very, very carefully at how you actually set up the base of evidence that you are going to build your product client customer base on. You have to do that in a very careful way with an audit trail that is going to be there to use if necessary. Hopefully not to justify the claims you've made about the product, but maybe to justify within the due diligence exercise if you're selling on your business or if you're looking for investors coming into it. And so these are important considerations. What do I want to say about this from a commercial lawyer's point of view? Well, one of the things that I've certainly become involved in is some of the questions that can be raised around products and the way they're represented. A client contacted me because a competitor had started what turned out to be a social media frenzy over a blog that they placed on their website. And it's a company that bases its product on AI. And they were satisfied that they could make a claim about a particular disability that children might have based upon interactions, using the mouse, using the keyboard, response times, and so on. And they could identify a particular condition with 96% certainty. And so this led to a frenzy on social media of that doesn't make sense. There's the degrees of involvement in this particular condition. It requires very careful clinical assessment. And what this brings to mind is that you have to think about what backup you've got for the evidence that you've got. If you're going to make a claim based upon research-based evidence, which is really what that was, you must think about using a higher education institute, a university potentially, to help you with that. If the research is done within the walls of a university, then it is subject to really significant protocols on its validity, peer review, and the university is actually effectively backing up the research if it's going out in the name of that university or supported by that university. So the message there is really be careful about employing researchers to work with you. Have a look at the British Education Research Association's website, because you'll find some interesting information on that. What else would I say? I think finally, I would say we've got to think about the role of parents now. Parents are now engaging more in education through the facility of EdTech. And therefore, you have another line of argument, if you like, or challenge, if you like, where parents will be seeing much more visibility of what's happening in the classroom, because it's being replicated at home as well, potentially. And you've got some very clever parents out there. Some of them will be teachers. Some of them will be specialists in AI, for example. And the possibility of parents now starting to challenge the use of products is maybe something that we could see happening in the near future. So from a lawyer's perspective, you can see there's quite a lot of interest to us in this area of evidence backing for education products. And I hope that's been a useful summary of certainly my current thinking and my current involvement in the matter. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Frank. That's very, very insightful in terms of some of the detail and things to pay attention to for companies, whether they're just as I guess startup type companies or indeed companies that are a little bit more mature but re-looking at what is good evidence and how can they bring that to the fore in such a way that people are going to are going to look at it a little bit more, when they look at it a little bit more closely, it's going to stand scrutiny. Now, may I just sort of pass on to Ed Tranham at the assignment report. Ed comes to us with a little bit, as many of you will know, the assignment report is a monthly publication that comes out that many organisations subscribe to, or if you're not, you should, and really is packed full of information there. Ed has some very useful insights. I'll hand over to Ed. Thank you.
Just waiting. Well, thank you, Anthony, and I just want to, I think for this part of the webinar, I just want to sort of briefly share with you some of the sort of key drivers of valuation in the sort of UK K-12 focused M&A transactions, which we are sort of reporting on in the assignment report. So if we could just move on to the next slide, Tom. So here we have an overview of the sort of key value drivers that we are observing. I don't think there's any surprises here, but I think it'd be worth mentioning here in the context of today's webinar some of the just focusing on a few of these. The first one, looking at sort of product or products, some of the questions we often ask founders, owners during interviews include: what problem or problems does your solution solve? Does it deliver the whole solution or part of the solution? How scalable is the product? Is it a need to have product? Who in the school will buy it? Now, we see, and it may not be a surprise, but we see too many early stage companies, and some not so early, that struggle to answer some of these questions. Another interesting driver here in terms of value is the attractiveness of the market. In many ways, you know, the UK schools market is a function of government policy and funding, and as we've seen in the past, changing government policy can actually impact aspects of the market quite dramatically. So 12 months ago, tutoring companies were dreaming of sky-high valuations driven by the National Tutoring Programme. Today, it's a completely different landscape. And looking at the white paper, the latest white paper, we now have Oak Academy 2 on the horizon, which for some will impact the attractiveness. Well, for some investors, will certainly impact the attractiveness of segments of the market. Although personally, I can't see how, or I can't see this new curriculum body ever having enough funding to fully deliver on its ambitions. Another key driver is the sales model. I think scalability doesn't just relate to product. Signing up the first 200 secondary schools is one thing. Moving on to 1,000 and at the same time minimizing customer churn is a completely different order of magnitude. So being able to demonstrate an effective sales model is a must and will drive value, especially for early stage companies. On people, I think knowing your strengths and weaknesses as founders or owners and hiring senior people to fill the gaps is very important in growing your business. You really can't do it on your own. And if you're going to exit when you sell the business, make sure you already have a team in place to take the business forward. And finally, efficacy, or the impact of your product or products on learning outcomes and evidencing that it provides a return on investment. Now, given that EdTech is a very crowded market and the schools market is forever under some kind of spending constraint, being able to show your product, your solution makes a difference, we are seeing is becoming an important differentiator in the market, and one that is increasingly being looked at by investors and acquirers. So if we move on to the final slide and drill further down, one thing that we are also observing that these sort of value drivers or drivers of value are often a function of the growth stage of a company. So here in this in this matrix, we've categorized companies into three groups. Those that we describe as chasers, these are early stage companies, sometimes with products that are struggling to make an impact, often with a market share of 5% or less. We have the next group, which are challengers. Again, these are companies that have reached escape velocity and perhaps now with a market share of 10 to 20%. And here, and the final column are the what we describe as the champions. These are established brands with a market share of more than 30%. There's also another group which we've excluded here, which you could describe as the challenged. And these are often companies that are long in the tooth with established products and have lost market share in recent years. For chasers, as you can see, efficacy is often seen by investors as maybe a sort of medium-weighted factor when looking at valuation, principally because for early stage companies, efficacy is often difficult to evidence. But I think it's important, as you can see from here, where efficacy moves up a notch in terms of the challengers and champions, that founders need to be planning ahead for, as Frank just described, the various issues relating to how you evidence improvement in learning outcomes. But at the end of the day, and I think it's worth remembering, at the end of the day, valuation and these value drivers is not an exact science. And as we've seen recently in one major transaction that has temporarily stalled, the difference between two valuations can be as much as 100 million. Anyway, I'll hand you back to Anthony. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you very much, Ed. That's exceptionally insightful from somebody who has a very, very good view right the way across the sector, and whose judgments are certainly ones that we've been looking at for many years, and certainly I think certainly helped myself and my co-founder Ian as we proceeded through our journey to a successful exit last year, which brings me nicely to the company that helped us to achieve that. But also one that has a good amount of experience in the sector to carry. Over to you.
Well, morning everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. So I'm Kari. I'm a partner at ThinkCap Cavendish. I joined about 1.5 years ago, and I focus on the broader EdTech, education and human capital spaces. As a firm, we're very focused on technology, and within that, EdTech. Personally, I've had the pleasure of advising such high-profile transactions as Nord Anglia Education and Learning Curve, which is more recent. And as Anthony alluded to there, as a firm, we recently helped GCSE Pod achieve their exits as well. So when we're advising, and it's probably worth giving you a bit of an overview as to what we do as ThinkCap Cavendish, in case you don't know, we are very often seen as the entrepreneur's investment bank. So we advise entrepreneur-led businesses in terms of their refinancing, mergers and acquisitions, IPOs, debt advisory, trying to get them from one stage of their development journey to the next, and that's what we're best at. So in doing that, we get a real insight into what investors or lenders or buyers are looking for in an EdTech business and how that differentiates that business. I'm going to borrow from a couple of the sort of phrases that both Frank and Ed used here. You know, Frank mentioned that, you know, are there good EdTech businesses or bad EdTech businesses? It's probably a bit harsh to characterize someone as a bad EdTech business, but what we do know is that the statistics show that 2/3, a staggering 2/3 of EdTech licenses are not actually in consistent and regular use. Going to the point around the wastage that we see within the school space. But obviously this applies not just within academia, it also applies within corporates, within vocational training, within all the different verticals where EdTech is relevant. So what is it that makes the 1/3 of EdTech licenses that are in regular use more relevant and better, and puts them in that sort of good EdTech camp? So I'll borrow from Ed in this case. You know, the number of businesses we see, particularly in the startup world, that are effectively solutions in search of a problem, that's part of the issue. So where I like to boil it down to is what makes a business in EdTech worth, 2, 3, 4 times revenue versus one that's worth 10, 11, 12 times revenue, and just plucking those sort of numbers out of the sky. And we can talk later on about what are the various ingredients that drive that valuation. But in my mind, there's 2 key points. One is criticality, and that is often driven by content, but it's that relevance to why does your organization need it? Why are you in that 1/3 of products that isn't regular use? And the second piece is measurability. You have to be able to measure the outcomes. So let's take a very simple example, LMSs. They're 10 a penny, there's thousands of them out there. They're probably all very good. I'm sure there's some rubbish ones out there as well, but most of them are very good. It is extremely difficult for a new LMS to break into that marketplace, because even a much worse quality LMS with a huge marketing budget and market share and establishment is always going to be the incumbent. So what makes a more interesting business, because most EdTech businesses have an LMS element to them, whether it's their own or whether it's a third-party one, is the addition of content to that and the ability to measure your ROI in terms of what you're achieving for your ultimate customer. So if that customer is a school, for example, GCSE Pod have a fantastic stat that the users of GCSE Pod consistently receive 1 grade higher than the average. And that is evidence, it's third-party evidence, and that's what can really drive the usage from a customer point of view, but also the valuation from an investor, lender, buyer perspective. In terms of the criticality, the key measurement that we look at there is the retention rate. That is really the mirror image of how critical you are to an organization. If your retention rate is near enough 100%, you're probably pretty important to what they're trying to do. So not to be outdone by Ed, as he put up some charts, I'll probably put up one graph as well, if you don't mind, Tom, and just show this sort of graphically, where traditionally, when we've looked at valuation in this market, you look at the growth rate and you look at the margin. It's very much a financials-based approach to it. The way the EdTech market is developing now, we're seeing much more of a 3-dimensional way of looking at it. And on the y-axis, that's where we charted the criticality and the measurability, and the metrics that you look at in terms of assessing that is the subscription percentage, the repeat business, the retention rates, and the ROI. And we'll get onto that in the Q&A, I'm sure, as to what does ROI mean to different organizations. But if you can't measure the outcome, it's very, very difficult to demonstrate your impact. So with that, I guess I'll hand back to Anthony, and we can move on to some questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Kari. It's really, really insightful, certainly for those businesses who are in that stage where they're starting to look at shareholder value and realizing some of that. And you've got to get those building blocks in early. As I think, as Frank said at the very beginning, you've got to get those in early and be legally sound, and also to be able to stand scrutiny from schools as well, in terms of what is it that they are looking for to be able to progress successfully to where you want to go. And it isn't a straight line. It's there are lots of bumps in the road, but I think that's where it tests the mettle of founders and managers in businesses, to be able to surface that in a way that certainly is going to mean something to other people. Now, we have some initial questions, and I'm just going to see if there's any questions that's also coming in from the panel. So I've got a question which I think Frank's been quiet for a while. So Frank, I'm going to come in with a sort of a bit of a legal one to start with, and in the work that you're doing across the sector. And I guess you're in a position where sort of the typical questions that have been asked before, and now sort of the things that are are being, let's say, asked of companies. So the question would be, what are the traditional and now more importantly emerging considerations for EdTech companies to pay closer attention to as they grow their businesses? You're on mute, Frank.
Yeah, that was to make sure I was behaving myself while the other speakers were up. Yes, I think one of the considerations, I kind of touched on this at the beginning of my presentation, and that is entry points into the market for the business. As I was brought up by some good business development advice, I was encouraged to think about entry points. How do you get your clients? What are the entry points? And for the EdTech sector, that's a really critical issue that they've always had to contend with ever since EdTech began. And it's not easy in our country because of the fragmented nature of our base of schools. We still have an awful lot of schools that are state maintained, where technically you're contracting with the local authority, but of course the customer is the school. But then you've got all these multi-academy trusts that have emerged. And so the way that you get your entry point into the market is obviously still very much directly with the school, even within a multi-academy trust model, because of the way that the funding is devolved to the schools. And teachers do value that independence of decision-making in terms of how they actually have freedom to teach within the classroom and what tools they use. So that's the kind of consideration, excuse me, that I think has been key traditionally. But there's also considerations now such as workload saving. Schools are now incredibly interested in anything that saves them time, because we know that's quite a contentious issue as between schools, their unions, and the Department for Education. And so if you have products where you can demonstrate genuinely that there is some workload saving from the product, that's going to get traction clearly. I'd like to think that data protection has become a key consideration for schools, but I think we perhaps do need to be a bit concerned about this. Data protection is still badly understood within the school sector in terms of compliance. I take the time every now and again to do some pro bono work with schools, taking the leadership team or the whole teaching complement of the school and working through data protection compliance with them. And I find that they still very much struggle in that particular area. And that's a difficulty when you yourself are trying to be compliant. Parental engagement, I touched on that earlier. Helping schools with parental engagement is bound to be a positive in the way that your product is looked at. And I think the final thing that is a major consideration is when you're introducing AI methods of working within your product, the care and attention you've got to pay to the AI agenda there is really significant, and it is an incredibly complex area. The Information Commissioner's Office has issued tomes of documents on the subject. They have a whole team working in the area of AI. And as a lawyer, I have difficulty with it because parts of documents tend to be written in a governance style way. Other parts are written in an AI, very techie way. So there's parts I can honestly say I really understand, there's parts I really struggle. And if you're a technical person working in AI, you'll clearly relate to the technical part, but you'll probably struggle with the governance part. And finally, I'm sorry, I'm giving you quite a list of things when I think about it, but compliance with the Children's Code has become a key consideration. And that, when it comes to due diligence, if you're looking for investment, if you're looking to sell your business, is your product truly compliant with the Children's Code is going to be an increasingly important significance.
Wow, Frank, there's quite a list there, I think, for people. It's just as well this meeting's being recorded, so that people can then start to make note of those. Ed, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, and I think one of the big things is the tech bit in EdTech, because I think as maybe traditional publishers have not had to worry about things such as networking processes, cybersecurity processes, just having your documentation correct. So I think from an early stage, I think any EdTech business should be thinking that they've got those processes all in order, so that when it comes to a point of maybe exiting, that all that is quite easy to piece together. Because I think one of the big issues now and it's popped into due diligence now, is not just commercial, legal, financial, but it's technology due diligence. And I think that's getting that right from day one is going to be a must do job for any founder, any owner.
And I know that personally and firsthand from what we've just been through. So it's where people are crawling all over your site to make sure that it stacks up. The code is not been half inched from somewhere else, and so forth. It is a really important piece. Because everything else can be right, and you can trip up on that, and I think, oh, hang on, where's the value in this? Because these guys haven't done it independently. Carrie, anything further from your standpoint on that question?
Well, I think the answers so far were pretty comprehensive, so hard to materially add to that. I'd echo that point about if the commercials stack up, and that's got to be the first point that you look at, and that's where the value is driven. But if you don't own your code, if it's not protected, if it's not protectable, or you don't own your content, or your content is not protected, then all of that value that you see on the commercial side falls away. And typically, when you think about how a transaction works, the guys like ourselves, we go out there and get the value, and then Frank and his teams will come in and protect that value, and then you've got the full package to take to exit.
No, that's thank you, Carrie. I've got another question. Actually, it's probably going to be led by yourself, Carrie, and I think this is something that from our dealings is close to your heart. So, a question that we have here is, with the rise of ESG investors across all sectors, are you finding their approach to EdTech different to traditional EdTech sector investors?
So yes and no. There's a huge amount of capital coming into ESG funds at the moment, and traditionally the view has been that EdTech as a whole falls within that because it is within education. But there is a big difference, and it is a difference that also drives value and also splits apart the funds that are much more generalist and are just trying to shoehorn anything that you can theoretically shoehorn into ESG, and don't necessarily bring the additional elements to an investment beyond the capital, to what we call the impact funds, and they are looking for genuine impact. So this goes back to that earlier point around what is it that your platform does. If you are a bog standard LMS, yes, you're in education, but what is your impact? What are you actually changing? What are you driving? Can you evidence that? So to take a personal example within our firm, we are a professional services business. ESG is very close to our hearts, and when we started first looking at where is our impact, we thought, okay, well, what can we do about the environment and so on? We realized very quickly that actually our environmental footprint is very little. All we can do is measure it, seek to minimize it, and offset the rest. But where we genuinely have an impact is on the S, on the social, gender diversity, mentoring startups from underprivileged backgrounds and so on. So this goes to EdTech businesses as well. Identify what your impact is, what you are changing. Are you generating measurable higher results in the GCSE stage, for example? Are you generating measurable improvement in compliance outcomes for a corporate? If you are generating a genuine impact on society, then the impact funds will come in. They have a very short, so a slightly long-winded answer to getting to the bottom line, which is they have a much narrower remit as to what sort of businesses they can invest in, but there's this huge amount of capital chasing them. So the laws of supply and demand, therefore, mean that you can generate higher valuations. So if you've identified where you make the difference, where your actual impact lies, then you ought to be in a position where you are a more attractive asset, and arguably better for the world as well.
No, that's really interesting, for Carrie, and I think the other person that may actually have a little bit of input on this because of the companies that he's involved with is Ed. Ed, have you got any thoughts on that around the ESG side of things?
Well, I think not really much more to add. Actually, I think the thing, of course, is that when Carrie's talking about funds, they're looking for more significant assets, not significant assets, but certainly larger assets than often you'll see. Certainly, obviously, at the early stage, you're more looking for the winners, or you're looking for larger businesses. I think that's the only issue that they're looking to, the ESG investors are looking to invest in more sizable assets because they've got those particular funds. It's no different really in terms of the difference between the scale of different types of investors, from venture capital all the way up.
No, that's thank you very much, Kari and Ed. Actually, we've got one come in that maybe I think it's something that Frank touched on earlier on, and I think somebody's looking for perhaps a little bit of advice. Where the question is, what advice would you give to companies when they're competing against a company who consistently makes claims they can't substantiate, and we believe to be false? Legal action is prohibitively expensive. And schools tend to react badly to what is seen as bad blood if you go public. So, Frank, have you got any advice for that attendee on what they've said?
Yeah, it's right that taking legal action can be expensive, but it's not expensive to take the first steps towards that legal action. You've obviously got to be on safe ground in terms of your own position, in terms of they genuinely are doing something that is wrong. And what could be wrong? It could be their marketing claims. The Advertising Standards Authority sits out there, and it's not just interested in consumers, it's interested in business to business transactions as well. And so you do have to think about this, think about if the Advertising Standards Agency is relevant to be dealing with it. But so there's other routes you can take. But coming back to the legal answer, it doesn't cost that much to do a kind of letter before action, a warning shot to them. And that just might help. No guarantees, obviously.
No, thanks, Frank. I think that hopefully that helps the person who raised that question. And actually, we've got one from that's been targeted at Carrie. Actually, if a founder is being consistently approached for acquisition, but company is still a small or challenger company, and so just wants some preliminary advice, would you suggest reaching out to someone like yourself? And what information would you expect them to bring to a first meeting, and when do fees kick in?
Good question. It depends entirely on the firm and the advice. We like to build long-term relationships, and we like to learn about new and interesting and exciting companies. So we will generally have a policy of never turn down a first meeting, share some information, absolutely no strings. Fees only kick in when you actually go into a process. So if you have an inbound approach and you want to understand what should you do, then absolutely approach someone like ourselves or many other high quality advisors that are out there. And anybody who tries to tie you up into an engagement and start getting you to pay fees probably isn't in it for the right reasons. But it costs us very little to give you a bit of free advice and build a lifelong relationship, hopefully. And when you're worth $1 billion, then that investment in time was very much worth it.
No, thanks, Gary. That's really hopefully really helpful for that individual. I think we've got one that's come in respect of research, and so I think this probably goes back to Frank, which is how is the best way to find researchers in a university who would share your interest in proving efficacy in EdTech tools? So are there universities out there that are more active in the EdTech space, and is there sort of a short list of universities and higher level education establishments that people should go to, or is it just the one nearest to you? So Frank.
maybe the right answer is the one nearest to you. If it has an institute of education, if it has an education teacher training facility within it, which many do, because they frequently will have researchers attached to it. The reason the one nearest you might be the best idea is that the interactions you want with them could become significant. I don't have a list of significant ones. I've seen information from 2 London universities that clients are using where they've commissioned research reports and they use these in the marketing of their products. I think the one that stands out is undoubtedly UCL, which has a globally recognized institute of education, and it created Educate, which is a business accelerator for businesses that already had their concept and where they had probably started trading but wanted to move to the next stage and start to take investment. And one particular one I'm aware of is it was a virtual reality product with an education basis. How do you get the research on that? Well, what the university organised was half term, got some children together in a particular museum that was the focus for this product, try out the product with these children and write the report based on that. So certainly there'll be a number of options out there, possibly a local one for that very reason that that locality point there was important there. But certainly look at this and look at what your competitors are doing as well. I don't know if this will help, but when at EdTech Evidence Group published a blog, one of your blogs, Anthony, you gave links to particular research that existing members have undertaken, and so you can see the basis of their evidence, and perhaps these companies would also help Anthony give ideas of who to approach.
Well, I think if it was on there, then I think there are organisations that are, if you like, up for it, and so I think that's thank you for reminding me of that, Frank. That's the most useful. I guess Ed or Kari, do you have anything further to add? I guess on the research side and that side of how companies can say further bolster their claims.
Yeah, I think in the areas that you're targeting with your product or with your service, there will be academic conferences where the participant lists are published and so on. So either attend those conferences or look at the attendee lists to identify people who share an interest in that particular vertical that you're working in, and contact them directly. Same thing with academic journals. They're not that difficult to get hold of. So identifying through those, they've got very good searchability across the databases. Who are the researchers that share that interest? Because if you cold approach somebody who is in the broader education market, there might not be any relevance there. So it's quite difficult. So it's really identifying those that share the interest and passion in the area that you are targeting.
Yeah, on that subject, if I can come back in, Anthony, I should have mentioned this earlier. If the product that you're developing has application in special educational needs, for example, think about the charities that are supporting children in with that particular issue, because those charities will, of course, have access to researchers. If you're developing a product that is going to benefit the people that they exist for, they're going to be interested in potentially helping you with that.
That's really good. Ed, anything further to add? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground on that one.
Yeah, well, I think the only thing really to add is that obviously I think a lot of the sort of outcomes or the support that your product solution is offering are not necessarily improvement in GCSE scores, or maybe in say a higher education you may have an AI type product that improves retention. And there that might not necessarily require you to go to maybe an academic institution to do the research. So I was just about to say other commercial researchers are available to do those kind of assignments.
Okay, very good. And let me look at one or two of the other questions that are coming in, which is. And it's probably actually one for you, Ed, which is how much difference is there in the level of information? I mean, for somebody who carries out, let's say, an amount of due diligence, and with the 3 different tiers that you have, the chases, the challengers, and the and the champions. How much difference is there in the level of information, specifically around evidence and efficacy required when DD is being carried out for these different levels of companies? I say, using your analogy of champions, challengers, and chasers, where you've got them, let's say in the chasers, they're in the sort of the medium bracket, so I guess it's fairly light. But in terms of as things get a little bit more serious from a financial perspective, how much more? What's the difference in the information that you're seeing as being required?
Well, it is interesting. I guess one of the things, particularly if you fall into the sort of the champion category, I think from either an investor or an acquirer point of view, at one level they'll be very happy the fact that you're a champion and your financials are all looking very good, and there's an assumption therefore that the market likes your product. But I think it was Carrie who was saying that you know, sometimes you're just there as a sitting tenant, and that actually it's competitive factors that are actually, you know, keeping you as the champion, where in fact you may not actually no longer have the right answer for the problems that schools have. So I think, yeah, so I think increasingly I think just because you're the champion, you shouldn't sort of push aside the evidence and the efficacy. So I think it's just as important as being a challenger. I think if you're in that sort of challenger, that middle tier, then in many respects, and you're, you know, I think from a, you know, looking out from the school's perspective, that's becoming increasingly important. I think looking out from an acquirer's point of view, you're really using that evidence to answer the question again Carrie raises about what makes you different in this market. Why are you a different LMS in this market? So I think it's, yeah, as you go up, it becomes equal, you know, more important, and champions shouldn't just discount it because they've got a big market share.
No, that's thanks, Ed. That's really, really insightful. Frank or Kari, anything further to add on that point?
Not from me.
So we have another question which has come in, which is the difference between. So, what are the key are the key value drivers the same for direct to consumer EdTech, as in parents, in comparison to B2B? Probably that's one for, I guess, between Ed and Kari on that one.
Sure. I think in principle, it is primarily the same concepts that drive it. Now, how you measure your outcomes obviously depends entirely on what you do. You know, I've given some examples earlier. You know, if you're a corporate, if you have a corporate B2B market and for example your training includes compliance and so on, you can measure in real time number of compliance failures versus a benchmark that you had previously. So that is a measurement of outcome. Then you also need to have your typical software measures that you look at. So how much does it cost to acquire the customer, and what is the lifetime value of that customer, because that is a direct driver of your ultimate profitability as a business, you know, revenue growth, margin, all that sort of stuff, and retention rates. But where you find a really big difference between B2B and direct to consumer is that typically in EdTech, you own the customer in the direct-to-consumer market for a much shorter period of time. Therefore, something has to give. Either your pricing has to be such that you can generate your lifetime value from that customer in a much shorter period of time. You know, if you are selling a product to a school and they're probably going to be using this for 10, 20, 30 years, especially if you keep product innovation up year on year, because they've got no reason to get rid of it if it's demonstrating the results. But if you're a parent and you're taking a product to help your children get, you know, through a certain stage or through some mentoring or whatever, it's a really short lifetime that you have them for. Therefore, you either need to have high lifetime value or you need to have a really low customer acquisition cost. And in the D2C market, customer acquisition is typically the hardest bit. You know, how can you acquire customers efficiently and at the right price? So if there were, whilst the concepts of what you're looking for are the same for B2B and D2C, what you should really look at and hone in on is what is your customer acquisition model and how long do you own the customers for in the D2C.
Yeah.
Really, really good advice. And I guess somebody else who sees this, Ed, is somebody else who sees this.
No, well, absolutely. The customer acquisition cost, lifetime value is so important. I think the other thing I think which is always intriguing, it's about the pricing of the D2C product or app is basically how you assess the total addressable market. That's the other aspect. I think in UK schools, it's quite easy to take the number of schools, etc. But what are the how many parents are going to buy these apps or whatever? That's a more tricky thing. So I think that's if you're very much in the D2C market, is having a lot more analysis of the market you're in and the sort of demographics and I know this is something, for example, driving the sort of online tutoring market in the D2C space is actually how you define it, and I think for some it's often probably you hear sort of 2 billion as a sort of value. We think that's significantly less than the sort of headlines that you see in often I guess sort of put out there by investors and by companies themselves. So total addressable market, get a handle on that. I think that's a big thing.
And I guess for Frank, who probably less frontline on that, but you also see things come across your desk that are some are D2C, some are B2B. What's your view on that, Frank?
Yeah, I think what's just been said is really interesting, because the products that parents will take, they're clearly motivated by giving their child a bit more of a leg up, if you like, in terms of academic success. They're supportive of the child. But many of the products that I see, the clients I work with, are building onto their existing B2B product, if I can call it that, the products they're encouraging schools to take. They're building on parental access to the outcomes of the assessment modules, for example, and allowing interactions between the parent and the school. So these are the sort of things that are coming in. Now, that doesn't, well, it probably does add value to the product in terms of the B2B product, but it's not giving the business anything more in terms of its relationship with the parents. So this is a really interesting issue. And I think businesses do need to be encouraged to think about the parental access they can give, because that's going to add value to the main product that their focus is on.
I mean, I think I've got some first-hand experience of this. Is that when we started GCSE Pod back in the dim and distant past of sort of the 2008, we started it out as a direct-to-consumer product. We very quickly realised that at that time there wasn't much appetite for it, and so we switched very swiftly to a B2B. But interestingly, we did start to go back to address the direct-to-consumer market in the latter year or so, and I think that's is one of the things that our acquirer is building on. But it's also about, the other thing I would say is about timing, because at the time that we started, certainly the market was not ready for it. The devices that people had in their pockets, their hands, were not. There wasn't enough of them back in sort of 2007-8, and but obviously now there is, and so there's much more accessibility. So that sort of access for the market that you're challenging is a really key thing. But for us, as I say, an early stage business, it wasn't, and that was, I guess, 14, 15 years ago. But it's timing, I guess, is everything as well, in terms of how you're pitching something to the need of that particular market at that particular time. We've had a question come in, which is just really about the further on the question around direct to consumer, which is so it's more about examples. Where have you seen examples of direct to consumer businesses that have achieved the low CAC or high LTV? Any lessons we can learn? So I guess Carrie is probably between Carrie and Ed a little bit as observers on this. What are your thoughts? So where have you seen examples of D2C businesses that have achieved low CAC or high LTV, and any lessons that we can learn?
That's quite a tough question, actually, in that there are not that many very successful D2C propositions out there. That probably actually says it all. But typically the ones that have had the most success are ones that have a gamified product. So think Kahoot or Duolingo or something like that. It's a gamification of the underlying product, because that keeps your customer retention in place. The other thing that typically drives successful D2C businesses is something which is a lasting product. So you're not trying to address a single problem at a point in time. For example, a certain the 11 plus or whatever, how do I put my children in the best position for that? And then you've lost the customer immediately after that. It's something that is a lifelong learning challenge, for example, language learning and so on. And that's why you see some of the most successful direct-to-consumer products out there are language-based.
Yeah. Okay. And Ed, from your perspective, your observer perspective.
Well, yeah, well, it is a challenge. I think looking at there are some interestingly listed companies, a couple of listed companies, one of which is Cluey Learning in Australia, that just showing to some extent is more a demonstration of how difficult it is to get a decent long time value. I think their lifetime value on a moment is something like, I think from memory, something like 2 times cost of acquisition. It's not, it's not a great multiple. It's yeah, you need I think to enter that D2C space, you need deep pockets. That's generally the message.
Yeah, your starting point ought to be a minimum of 3 times lifetime value to CAC as a benchmark.
Yeah.
Which is why it's one that we didn't push for GCSE pod. We thought, hang on a second, the market's not ready. We need to find another way. And so even still later on, then the market would become crowded when we sort of wanted to, or more crowded when we wanted to go back into it. And I guess we've got one final question to ask, which is probably again Ed and Kari, which is, are we seeing more international investors coming into the UK? Or is the status quo sort of still UK international, or are we seeing more international money come back into the UK EdTech space, or where are we? What are we seeing right now?
Yes.
Okay.
The biggest EdTech investors out there are all US, and they all have a mandate to invest internationally, and they are increasingly looking at the UK, and not just the UK, but other territories as well. The UK has one major attraction compared to other, for example, European territories which have great tech scenes and so on, is that it's English speaking, and the UK education system has been exported to many countries and is seen as a premium education system. Therefore, the UK has a disproportionate number of high quality EdTech businesses as well. So the US funds will always look here, but that's where the money is. The top 10 EdTech investors in the world are all US, and they all have a mandate to invest in the UK.
And I guess, Ed, is that something you're seeing also on?
Well, it is. It's not. It won't be terribly exciting for most assets in the K-12 space. K-12 curriculum, UK curriculum is, and there are obviously some big businesses out there are attracting a lot of interest at the moment. But for a majority of investors, you're not, unless you've got something that's extraordinarily scalable, in the K-12 space, you're not going to be attractive enough to a US or any other investor.
I think Ed point is absolutely spot on there. That what they will look at is it's got to be scalable. It's got to be globally scalable. Sorry, I've got a fire alarm going off. I'll go on mute.
But it's interesting that the acquisition recently of Giglets and Sumdog by Scandinavian companies is because they are relatively small markets, and they're looking for they bought those businesses because they want to have a not just a UK footprint but an English language footprint.
Well, gentlemen, this has been really, really insightful, and I hope that our audience is sort of now feeling sort of an hour in suitably more informed on a Friday morning. To Frank, to Kari, to Ed, thank you very much indeed. This has been, I think, a great webinar. Thank you all out there for also joining us. I hope you found it interesting. The session has been recorded. It will be circulated to you, both those who attended and those who registered. And I just wanted to say thank you very much from me, Anthony. Much appreciated. Have a great day.
Okay, goodbye.